Hi guys, I'm Adam Steele for the Hot Pole Studios, and if you've been following the channel for a while, you'll have seen that I'm kind of in the quest for the ultimate audio production PC that is silent. And I don't mean silent as in some sort of acoustic foam computer with kind of noise dampening. I mean literally 0 decibels, no fans, no moving parts, silent. Now, the last video that we did was kind of an upgrade of the computer, which was changing out the graphics card, and that's something that I'm revisiting today. So originally we were using the inbuilt Intel graphics, which weren't really cutting the mustard. So as a stopgap, we used a Geforce 1050Ti, which worked quite well for what we needed, because as well as the audio production, I also do some video production, and I was doing quite a lot of live streaming using XSplit or OBS. Now, there was something a bit weird going on with the 750Ti where it was causing a few pops and clicks in the audio, and also it had 2 fans attached to it, which meant that it wasn't silent, so it was only a stopgap. So at that point we got the NVIDIA Quadro NVS450, thinking a Quadro will have rock solid drivers, the Quadro will be the be all and end all. We found it on eBay, not too expensive. And it turns out it wasn't too expensive because it wasn't very good. And for what we needed anyway, the NVS series, it turns out, this was actually 2 rather rubbish graphics cards kind of stapled together onto one card, which is why it had 4 outputs. It was actually 2, essentially the lowest of the low graphics cards stapled together, which meant that it was rock solid and could do 4 screen outputs, including the 3 you see behind me and a TV up there. But the downside was that it couldn't do any sort of graphical load. If I had a window of Chrome open whilst I was recording audio and I started scrolling through that page, I mean, you'd say, oh, why would you do that? But what if I'm looking at the lyrics for a song while the singer's in the vocal booth? Or what if I'm following the notes for a film that I'm recording the audio for? Whatever. There are plenty of circumstances where I would need to do something with the computer other than just the audio. So there were some sort of dropouts which didn't get recorded, which was good. The audio engine was stable, but still it's not the kind of thing you want to happen in front of your clients. It doesn't look very professional. And also XSplit or OBS, which use graphics card acceleration, were just not happy with using the Quadro card. I mean, the GPU meter at the bottom of XSplit tells you the percentage of the graphics card that you're using, and it was pretty much pinned at 100% before we'd even done anything, which was a major issue. So we've made another upgrade, or at least we're going to do that today. So I present to you, Palit have made the Geforce 1050Ti with the KalmX version, which, as you can see from the packaging, has absolutely no fans whatsoever, which means it's massive, it's passive, it's here, and it should, in theory at least, have no noise. I mean, yes, you hear about things like coil whine, but in my experience, especially for the kind of workloads that I'm going to be using it for, coil whine is not an issue. It really isn't. I mean, compared to fan noise, if you can hear coil whine on a graphics card, it's quite likely faulty, or maybe not made with the highest quality components, or maybe you're overclocking it or running at an absolute monster of a level. I've not found that to be something that I've heard. I mean, we'll find out with this graphics card, but up to now, it's never been an issue for me. So this is kind of the middle of the range of the latest generation of GeForce graphics cards, which means if I wanted to, I could probably play something like PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds on the audio PC. I mean, I'm not going to, but it's nice to know that I have a machine powerful enough to handle whatever I throw at it, which might include like multiple camera and screen capture XSplit, where the graphics card will take the load away from the CPU, meaning I can still do heavy mix workloads and show you guys live without having to run a 2-computer setup, which I might still do at some point. I might have a separate capture card and a separate streaming PC, which is something I've thought about, but then that will be a noisy machine. Fine for those circumstances, but when I'm listening at a low mixing volume level, which you should be doing, by the way, you should be mixing at quite a low volume level, I still want to be able to hear things like background hiss and problems. I want them to stand out of the mix at me without me having to go and deafen myself, which negatively affects your mix performance. So let's switch over to turning off the PC and switching in this graphics card. See what we get. Okay, so I think this gives me a good opportunity to answer a few viewers' questions that I've had, because you'll see certain things that I've had all sorts of kind of PC nerds, experts, all sorts tell me, oh, you have to do this, you have to do that, you must do this, you must do that, when in truth, it's nowhere near what people think it is. For instance, people say, oh, you should never leave a computer plugged into the mains while you work. I completely disagree. What I do is I turn off at the switch, because this is Britain, every plug has an off switch, and I turn it off at the power supply. But what that means is that I still have a solid connection to ground. So everything is grounded as I work. Oh, you should never work on carpet. I've never found it to be a problem, especially being consistently grounded. Oh, you should touch the case before you work. What am I doing right here? So, without further ado, let's unclip all of the DisplayPort connections from the back of this Quadro NVS. That's all four. And then get that unscrewed from there and remove this properly. And then we'll do an unboxing of the 1050 Ti. See, it's quite a big graphics card, this. It turns out it's actually kind of two graphics cards entirely on the same board, as you can actually see from the underside of the two chips. And it's quite warm, considering it's not really been doing anything, which is a little bit worrying. If it's been running pretty much full tilt all the time, just to run like the GUIs of all the 2D graphics that you get in audio programs, then that's a little worrying. So let's get into our 1050 Ti right here. So this graphics card should solve a lot of my problems. Oh, one extra thing is I uninstalled the Quadro graphics drivers on the PC, which is still on Windows 7, just because I tend to I like Windows 7 for audio production, because it's not got all the extra stuff which you don't really need for audio, trying to interrupt what you're doing. I mean, I have Windows 10 on my production laptop, which does work absolutely fine. I'm not one of those completely anti-Windows 10 people. Oh my word, that is huge. Right, so ground myself again. Electrostatic sensitive device. Yes, I can see that. There we go. One more grounding. Oh, what a monster. So, look at the size of that. They're heat sinks. That is way bigger than I thought it would be. That's awesome. Is there anywhere to plug in a PCI? No. So there's no PCI external power. This will run off the 75 watts that the the PCI Express slot will give it. It's got one DisplayPort, one HDMI, and one DVI on it, which is fine for me, because even though I was using all DisplayPort before, that was just to meet the requirements of the Quadro card. I was actually using DVI to DisplayPort adapters, HDMI to DisplayPort adapters, so this will actually suit me much better. So let's get this installed. One more grounding. That is absolutely huge. Massif, whatever silly term you want to use, that's big. Luckily for me though, it's not even as big as the no-fan CPU cooler there. So if we get, was there a bag of screws that came with it? It means I don't even have to go searching through the power supply box to find the PCI power connectors, because this Seasonic power supply is absolutely great. It's a 480 watt power supply, I think it was, completely fanless, which for the 75 watts here and 65 watts here and the rest of the miscellany in the computer, I'm not even vaguely worried about heat generation or anything, because the other thing that you will have noticed when I pulled this out is that I've stopped having the lid on this. The airflow with the lid off underneath the rack here, all these racks are only about this deep, which means there's plenty of airflow above inside. It's very hard to get a camera in, so I'm afraid you'll just have to believe me, but there's a lot of space for the airflow behind here, so I have absolutely no worries about temperature. I mean, on a general day-to-day basis, I'm not going to be absolutely slamming this anyway. I'm going to do a couple of benchmarks just for temperature tests. But when I do benchmarks, I said in a previous review that the 6700 non-K, because it's a 65 watt chip, was getting to about 78 to 80 degrees on benchmarks in here. Benchmarks. Not on a general day-to-day basis. That's when you absolutely pin the computer to 100%, which you would never do on a daily basis. And even below 80 degrees, I'm happy for that to be the absolute theoretical maximum, because that means that in practice, it's more like 60, 65 degrees, which is absolutely within tolerance of the unit. And people saying, oh, well, it's going to have a shorter lifespan. Shorter lifespan than what? I mean, if it only lasts 3 years instead of 5, 3 years from now, this processor will be out of date and I'll be buying a new one. So it's a work tool, it's not a home computer, and that's something that's really quite interesting, and you have to distinguish. This is a work computer. This is something that I use to pay the bills. So if it's not keeping up, it will be replaced with something newer and something that keeps pace. The more and more that I move into using software instead of hardware, I mean, I've stopped using hardware compressors on the way in now. I do everything with like Slate Digital's plugins, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I still need good preamps on the way in, sure, but beyond that, everything is handled in here. And it's handled through the RME radar here in about 2.5, 3 milliseconds. So I really have no issues. Anyway, let's plug the graphics in. Get the graphics drivers installed, and let's see how we do. Okay, so as you can see behind me, everything's set, everything's up and running, and there is XSplit running smoothly on this screen here. I've tried XSplit now while Reaper was running, had no dropouts. Used Furmark to test the GPU temperature. It did get up to 83 degrees, but that's using Furmark, which is the absolute hardest that you'll run a lot of graphics cards. And of course with no fan on it, that was almost expected. But now the temperature's coming back down, and with XSplit running, it's at a nice happy 65 degrees, which I'm fine with. I also used Realbench to test everything, and the hottest the processor got was 65 degrees. So we'll see how this gets on in a mixing environment, but I can't see there being any trouble with it now, because the graphics card is more than capable of hosting all the VST GUIs at the same time as, I mean, I even tried XSplit capturing Furmark and it was relatively smooth, which is ridiculous. So in the future, I think this is my solution, a 1050 Ti with no fan, with a 6700 Core i7 with no fan. No fan in the power supply, no spinning hard drives. The only noise in here is my breathing, and there's a little fan in the camera, and the camera's only here for this, so once the camera's off so I can work, this will be a silent room, which means I can work at 70 or 80 dB mixing levels and have absolutely no distractions and still be aware of all the little details in a mix. So I hope this has been useful for you. Any questions, feel free to answer them down below in the comments section. I'll try and get back to you. Thanks for watching. I'm Adam Steele for the Hot Pole Studios, and I'll see you in the next video. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe.